Right, welcome to January 2026. I want to talk a little bit about AI. Of course, it's the buzzword and the key topic for the last couple of years. And there's been a few learnings that I've had personally that I'd like to share with my viewers. And essentially, I want to get into a little bit of detail here. So most users today are using solutions like ChatGPT simply as prompt and answer. And in some of my prior about the rise of agentic AI, a key trend that happened very early on in 2025. The key learning that I've realized how enterprises can start to adopt AI and leverage it to go further beyond than just question answer is being able to drive tasks. You have seen many different companies. Some of them that come to my mind are Claude. There are other solutions as well that essentially are doing screen recording to understand what a user is doing. And then the AI takes over some of the repetitive tasks. Any task that is done more than twice can essentially be automated. And that automation requires some level of thinking. And that thinking is where the AI comes in. And that's where we start to see the growth of agentic AI in our day-to-day work. Personally, as I've talked about, there are areas such as deck preparation, research, analysis, putting together presentations where I heavily personally use AI. One of them is GenSpark.ai that I've talked about earlier as well. But something also came to my attention, which I want to spend a little bit of time on today, which is around the different types of AI. When it comes to deploying a successful AI solution within the enterprise, first and foremost is a mind shift from LLMs to RAG. So LLM stands for large language models and RAG stands for retrieval augmented generation. And what we basically mean here is LLM is your standard ChatGPT-like interface where you ask a question and you get a response that's coming through a large language model that it's trained on. With RAG, sometimes the AI does not have the information. It might be access to a Salesforce dashboard. It may be access to a cybersecurity system that might be your SIEM solution. Or it could be any other system, documents, a Google Drive, Microsoft Teams shared drive folder, where it is going and querying that solution in order to then be able to get you the most current information. So RAG provides at the right point in time the information that the user is looking for. For example, you might want to know what is the current Q1 trend for 2026 as a CRO. And now instead of going into a dashboard within Salesforce, you could, if you had set up RAG correctly using a specific AI of your choosing, it would then essentially go connect using an MCP server, and that just stands for Model Context Protocol. It's the new Age API on how AIs connect to underlying enterprise systems. And that's how it would then be able to pull the most recent report, analyze it, and then provide the user a response. So RAG is really the evolution of LLMs to then be able to provide real-time information on company-specific data that resides in their proprietary systems. The second aspect is we still see hallucinations in AI. And I believe this topic will continue through 2026 as the models become more and more efficient. And what hallucinations means, I've read a great article on it, which I'll try and explain in a few lines, is let's say typically whenever you ask an AI agent to do action A, it will then follow steps X to Y to Z, and Z being your output, X being your input, and Y being all of the steps it does in between. What happens over time is something called AI drift, where instead of it going from X to Y to Z, you notice for the same exact task, the AI agent goes from X to B to C to Z, different outcome. That's where you start to notice drift. And this can happen for a variety of reasons. Either the LLM model, the underlying model, has been drifted, which means some data is being manipulated or it's not correctly being able to follow the same steps that it used to. So that's where things such as rollback or being able to understand when AI drift happened is critical when it comes to putting policies, compliance, guardrails, audit trails on how the AI is coming up with these solutions. So we talked about two concepts, RAG, and that's really how agentic AI and AI agents become more prominent in the enterprise. And that's how it's evolving from just purely using an LLM, which is question answer, The second part is around the data and how AI drift can severely impact the output that you're looking for. So we need this constant monitoring. Another system that I have seen is called React, not to be confused with the JavaScript language. React is basically a framework in which the AI agent produces a response and it does it recursively, meaning in a loop, for somewhere between 3 to 5 times with thinking enabled, which means that each time the user is asking for a question or a workflow is in process, it runs it 3 times until it gets the most perfected answer and then goes towards the output. This avoids a lot of issues with hallucinations, making sure that through a recursive loop, it really gets to the gist of the answer that the user is asking for. So as I'm understanding these concepts, these are more concepts that I believe enterprises will start to deploy if they haven't already. One really interesting fact that I noticed is there was a data point that 72% of enterprises have adopted AI. Now that goes to something as small as we have a ChatGPT license to something more that we're actually running AI agents that are actually doing those tasks and automating a lot of the day-to-day activities. So those are some of the updates that I had related to AI. One of the key points when deploying enterprise AI is what data is it trained on? It doesn't necessarily always support the enterprise if an LLM is trained on everything that's on the internet. That's where we use something called vector databases. Vector databases enable you to take company-specific data, provide that to the AI model, and then it's trained specifically on those documents. So it cannot answer basic questions that a standard LLM could, but it will answer very specific questions related to the documentation, the data, the input that you have provided it, that it is trained on. And there's a lot of different methodologies on how vector databases are set up. But I can foresee more and more this becomes an area on setting up the right infrastructure within organizations and having the correct sort of vector databases set up so that you can get much more efficiency out of these AI models. The other aspect, and I'm advising and working with a company in this space, is around MCP server sprawl. You have many large organizations with developers that are now starting to plug in these AI agents to connect to underlying systems. One security concern is really trying to understand what these AI agents are connecting into and what level of access they have. There's a company founded by a close friend and colleague of mine named Gil Deba called MCPtotal.io. MCP Total essentially looks at your MCP servers, provides you with a secure MCP server to deploy in your environment, so you know that you have a trusted, non-exploitables, or at least the most secure version of an MCP that is available. So definitely check out MCP Total. It's an interesting space where you're going to see the sprawl and a lot of shadow AI happening within the organization. And for CISOs to be able to capture that, understand and enable developers to use securely the correct type of MCP servers is probably another area within the AI security space that I believe would be a growing area. Personally, as I had mentioned before, for a lot of deck preparation for clients, putting things together, I do use personally GenSpark.ai, and it's been a great help. But at the same time, it requires a lot of human oversight in order to ensure that the data is factually correct, that there is no hallucinations in it, and to continuously keep fact checking some of the information that's there. Another thing that I recently tried to work with is trying to generate demo videos for certain enterprise products. And the underlying solution that was most selected was Google's Nano Banana. I recently, as far as last night, generated a video. I would say I was medium impressed simply because it still hallucinates. It doesn't create the right script or necessarily the right video with the wording. There was basic spelling mistakes when the video was created. So would I say it's near an original authored video? Absolutely not. Does a good job, gets you there. I would say maybe 60, 65, 70% of the way. There may be other users in the market today who've put better controls around this. but from my first few experiences of generating some very deep technical based video demos that I had wanted to describe, Nano Banana did, I would say, a 6 on 10 job there. So that's the topic of AI. That's what I wanted to get across, and just some of the things that have been on my mind, and thought I'd share it with this broader audience. Thank you.